Joining this show today on the JDV Experience is my colleague and worker at Football Sapient. He covers the Los Angeles Rams and now the UCLA Bruins. None other than Mr. Nikko Buenavidez himself. How are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Not bad at all. So normally, normally I kind of start this thing with a little bit about the person, right, and getting into this career and stuff, and starting off with a little bit about yourself. So why don't you introduce everybody? Um, you introduce yourself to everybody and kind of get into what made you want to do this, to talk about sports and kind of pursue that as a career.
Yeah, so I started off kind of taking an interest in football in my freshman year of high school, so about 5, 6 years ago now. And that was basically like some of my buddies came to me like, hey, like you wanna play fantasy football with us? And I was like, oh sure, like I've heard of obviously the NFL, I knew some of the teams, but like I never was like really into it. So I joined the fantasy football league. My first pick was Todd Gurley, and that was that combined with being in LA, like that was kind of what led me to support the Rams,
Hmm.
and that was really fun. I mean, Todd Gurley just went crazy that year. That was the year he caught like 21 total touchdowns,
Hmm.
and that was just I was watching the games because like you watch the players play when you play
Yeah.
fantasy football, and I was like, wow, like this is really exciting. Like I want to learn more about this. And then I just kind of started getting more into it as the years went on. And then last year, I saw that I was on the fantasy football subreddit, and I saw that Will over at Fantasy's Finest was uh, he was asking for writers. So I was like, oh, like I got some extra time. It's the pandemic. It's about to be summer. Like I can go write a couple articles for him. So then I just started writing for him, and everything just kind of fell into place from there. I started here at NFL Sapient, and ever since then.
And I thought you did a really decent job covering the Rams because you kind of had a news type of style, a separate style article that you dropped every week, and it was the good, the bad, the meh. And you just kind of broke down what was good about the game, what was bad, and what was kind of meh about it. And you talked about the specific players and different things like that. And it helped kind of it was fresh and it was unique, which is what we look for on Football Sapien specifically. And so looking at the Rams this year, because you watched every game, you got, up to the Super Bowl and through the win. You're heading into 2022, right? And the draft is coming up. They don't have a pick until way late into the third round. So it's going to be kind of a sleeper. People will probably be sleeping if the Rams pick their first pick. But what do you think of this team with the way that they've built it? How do you see that direction kind of going right now?
Yeah, so I mean, they've had to do this pretty much every single year since they trade away lots of the picks. I don't think I've ever seen them pick in the first round since Goff. So I've definitely had to see. Like I remember watching the 2019 draft, and I was like, oh yeah, they finally have a first round pick, and they traded down with the Falcons. And I was like, oh man. So definitely, I wouldn't be surprised if Les Snead trades down with that pick even to just get more picks. But I definitely am anticipating a secondary player, I would say, just to give Jalen Ramsey some help, because that was definitely a weak spot on the team next year, was someone opposite from Ramsey.
Yeah, because right now it's projected you're going to have Robert Rochelle right there. And I watched Rochelle coming out of Central Arkansas last year, and I had some issues with some of the long speed and reaction type stuff, which I was actually just looking before we got on here, some of the Giants game, and he was not great in that game at all, where he just kind of he had trouble reacting. I think overall that was his big thing. He had some whiffs, but overall, because they've added Allen Robinson this year, right? And they, considering the cap space that they came in, they were strapped to start off. Where do you see the direction of this team headed right now? Oh, and then Bobby Wagner. I have to mention that one too. But where's this team? Is this team like going back to the Super Bowl? or is this kind of a they're going to be very competitive, but there's an element that's missing somewhere?
Yeah, I think they're going to be very competitive. The only element I can see just all over the team is just depth. Like I think everyone saw it in the Super Bowl last year. You know, when Odell went down, like there was no real like solid pass catcher behind him, and that just goes. That's like everywhere pretty much. There's no real solid group of corners. Like they don't have as much depth, pretty much because they're built on the foundation of the stars, which is not a bad thing, obviously, but you kind of want. That's what I think they're going to look for in the draft. It's just drafting some like solid depth guys that the vets can kind of teach and learn.
And I think that's kind of what they've done over the last several years with the way that they've structured this roster, and I think someone had pointed out that their hit rate on draft picks right now is outstanding. The production that they get from people, like Traven Howard was a 7th-round pick, in 2018, and he's developed into a suitable player at that position and, stepped up when they needed him to at times. Looking at the list right now, kind of like David Long, 3rd-round pick, ended up being a really good slot guy. Nick Scott stepped up all through the playoffs, 7th-round pick, 2019. Their hit rate across this team is really outstanding. Is that, you think that's more of a necessity type thing, or are they just that good at evaluating people?
I think they're pretty good at evaluating people. Some of them, I would say, don't really pan out. Like I know that like Micah Kaiser never really pans out, even though he started for them. I know like they love just like letting those the safety is probably one of their strongest positions that they do that at. They've drafted really good safeties and then they just let them walk in free agency. Like I know John Johnson, Lamarcus Joyner, those are the guys that like they have kind of hit on in the later rounds. And I know Jordan Fuller is also really good on Terrell Burgess. Like they're really good at developing the safety position. And I think especially with the coaching turnaround and everything, like that's really impressive when it comes to just developing a roster when you have so many people moving in and out.
Why is that they can develop that kind of talent? Is there some sort of secret to that you think?
I'm not exactly sure because I'm not in the building directly, but I can just tell by, like listening to some of the player interviews and like with the coaches and stuff too, that it's just definitely the culture for sure. And I know I listened to Liam Cohen when he was coming back, like he came back from Kentucky to be their offensive coordinator this year after Kevin O'Connell left.
Yep.
And he was saying like, yeah, this was the only job I was ever wanted to be at. And the only job he would have left Kentucky for was being with the Rams. And I was like, oh, like that definitely speaks to how Sean McVay runs his locker room and just that sort of thing.
And that's interesting too, because Kentucky had a hell of an offense this year, in terms of bringing in Will Levis, that quarterback out of Penn State. He's a transfer that came in and he played lights out. Like he's going to be a guy we're going to be talking about as the draft pick next year. And then, Wandale Robinson coming in, I think from Nebraska at wide receiver and finding ways to utilize him. There was a lot of that McVay type influence on that offense through their scheme and stuff. One of the things I think about the Rams that doesn't get sung enough about is the defensive scheme that when Brandon Staley was there developed. That it's changed a lot of how we call defense, across not just the NFL but college football too. A lot of disguise coverages, a lot of mixing zones and dropping guys left and right, and having that versatile secondary to move around and play a lot of different zones. And it's made it really interesting because it's so difficult for a quarterback to read that. And you're giving them looks that they haven't seen before. So I like some of that stuff that they do. And I think they've done a really good job schematically from that side. I honestly think that's why the safeties develop as well as they do, because they're consistently put in positions where they can succeed, right? And that's the number one key for any team when you're playing football and putting a team together is structuring it so that the team succeeds. So I think that's what it is the Rams, they don't have a specific set scheme. They make enough adjustments to fit what their roster is, and they put those guys into positions just to be successful. Because look at Cooper Kupp, right? Like if you compare Cooper Cup and his skill set across the league right now, right, and look at the top receivers, Stephon Diggs, I guess you could say Allen Robinson, but his production hasn't been there lately. Julio Jones, AJ Green. You go through the list of receivers over the last several years, and from a measurable standpoint, and from a skill standpoint, Cooper Cup isn't on par with them. But his production is better than all of them over the past couple of years. Why? Because he schemed so well. And that's where I think a lot of the Rams' success comes from. But you watched Cooper Cup all year. So I mean, you can tell me if I'm wrong.
No, you're definitely right for sure. Most of I was watching the Super Bowl the other day with his highlights in the Super Bowl because I'm doing a breakdown of the Sean McVay scheme and like why it works so well. And one of the big touchdowns that he had was, I think I sent it in our chat actually, but it was Cooper Cup came in on just a go route and they had Odell run a clear out underneath him. And that just kind of opened it up a lot for him just to go and get that touchdown in the back of the end zone. So he's just schemed like really well. I know they do a great job of like running motion and stuff to free open some like areas for him.
So what was the best thing about watching them this year? Outside of them winning the Super Bowl and having the thrill of covering, because I did that in 2017, because my favorite team, the Eagles, the first year that I started actually writing and covering sports, I was covering the Eagles, which is my favorite team for Fansided, and I got to watch them make that Super Bowl run and cover it as well. So that's a thrill when it's your favorite team and it was our first Super Bowl. You guys, I think, you'd won one with the Greatest Show on Turf, but that was probably before you were around.
Yeah.
So like having that thrill to experience that as your favorite team is something. But outside of that, what was the best thing about covering the team?
I think the best thing about covering was just seeing how the players reacted to, especially in November, like losing 3 straight in a row. Just like watching the mic'd ups, watching how they handled like the loss. That's more important than watching how they handle a win. It's just like, seeing how they get back and like kind of bounce back. Because I know afterwards in December, they won, I think, like 3-4 straight up until week 17 with the 49ers.
So is that kind of what you try to do with your coverage, is rather than being your tip, like what makes you stand out, do you think, in your opinion, from other people that cover the Rams?
I think that I like to think that I provide, more of a unique standpoint because most of the people that are paid like way more money than I am to cover the Rams, like they don't have, the same perspective that I do. Like I've been a fan since they pretty much came back to LA, and I've just kind of followed them since then. And just to be able to like be a fan and cover your team is different than just like someone at ESPN going, okay, you've been assigned to the Rams, and like just that kind of thing. I think also like I'm not a fan of the journalism where it's like you can tell every single thing that's going to be in the article just by like the title, or like the ones where they just tweet out something, like they take a tweet and just spin that into like an article. I'm not a fan of those.
So what is your process, as you cover the team? Like week one, you going into week one, what was that process? What did that process look like with how you wanted to cover it and what you wanted to do with it?
Yeah, so week one, I just did like a basic kind of recap article, and then I think it might have been Sean in our group text there had the idea of the good, bad, and the mad. I don't want to take credit for that one. That wasn't my idea, but he had that idea, and I was like, oh, that seems really great. It'd be great for our site if we had kind of a site-wide theme of doing that when covering games. So I just kind of took that and ran with it for the rest of the year, and it was like you said, it was something new that maybe people haven't been seeing. And that's kind of what I like to do just in my writing in general is, what I like to see as a consumer of this stuff, because I was a consumer of this stuff for a while until I started.
So from week 1 to week 18, did that process change?
Not entirely. I kind of stuck with that same format. When it was the bye week, I did do like a breakdown of the offense, defense, and special teams, and I know that people really liked that. And when they were struggling on defense the first couple weeks, I know I did a breakdown of that, like what was going wrong with the scheme and the players and stuff. I know that people were really interested in that because it's something that like all the fans hadn't really had a question about. Like, you had that dominant defense from last season compared to like what looked like a pretty average one this season. That was definitely a surprise for everybody.
And that's probably what pushed them to go get Von Miller, you know, right there at about the trade deadline, and gave up more picks, but got that star player and propelled that defense into the Super Bowl. So, how much do you think he's going to be missed from a scheme standpoint at this point, from what you know?
Yeah, I think he was a great plug and play player for them. Like he just kind of fit right in as like a run stopper, kind of good outside linebacker kind of player. And I think he's gonna be missed more for his like locker room presence because I remember seeing that they had posted a picture of the Lombardi and then like underneath Von Miller had written a note that said, "How much do you want it?" And that's just like the locker room presence that he brought to the team as a veteran who's who's been to a Super Bowl, been a Super Bowl
Super Bowl
MVP.
MVP. Yeah.
Yeah, so just the veteran, but that's another thing that I think they do a really great job on is getting these veteran guys that can teach the younger guys what it's like to be in the league, just have that veteran kind of leadership.
Going into the season, there was a lot of criticism about Matthew Stafford, especially after the trade. He gave up 3 first-round picks, to get him and Jared Goff, which I'm sure Rams fans didn't miss Jared Goff at all. But going into the year, and you were kind of seeing these different things about Jared, like Matthew Stafford, and oh, it's not going to elevate the offense, and whatever else that narrative was. What was? I know that you didn't agree with any of it. Why was that? Why did you think it would be different?
Well, first of all, I went to training camp, and the first couple throws I saw him throw, I was like, "Wow, this guy actually has a really nice arm." Like he was throwing lasers all day. He was hitting guys like in stride. Like I saw that and I was like, "That is definitely an upgrade from what I've seen in recent years." Like 2020 when the Rams played the Dolphins, I think that was literally the worst Rams game I've ever seen. I would say worse than the Super Bowl, and it's probably due to Brian Flores and how he was scheming things up against Goff. But I think that people were skeptical because they gave up a lot as they normally do. They like to give up
Hmm.
many first round picks. One of those I think was definitely to take on the massive Jared Goff contract. But watching just a little bit of Stafford in Detroit, you could tell that like he didn't have the team built around him, and the Rams were pretty much a quarterback away. And I think that's what's different from some of the other trades recently, like the Broncos as well. And the Browns,
Yep.
not so sure about the Browns, but the Broncos are also kind of in that same situation where it was like they have a solid defense, they have a decent offense, they just need like a really consistent quarterback. And that was the same situation for the Rams. Like, they had the best defense in the league 2020. They had, Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods, Cam Akers in 2020. And they just needed that last piece, which was Matthew Stafford.
How big? You said a quarterback away. You've watched Russell Wilson a lot over the last several years. How big is that for Denver getting him this year?
I think it's really big because from my perspective, I've seen Russell Wilson carry like the Seahawks on his back. And that is not an understatement. Like he would keep plays alive that like should have been dead at the whistle blow. And he just is like his presence in the pocket and his ability to just extend the plays and hit guys like consistently downfield is really, really impressive. And like watching as a fan, I'd just be like, screaming at the team, "Come on, get him!" And he'd just still be upright, and that was just crazy to watch. And I think that they were able to flip Drew Lock for them too, just to get him a second chance, to get Russ, and to give up those picks was definitely inspired by the Rams. But we'll see how it has to pan out in this next season.
You can make the argument that a lot of these trades that we've seen this year are all inspired by the Rams. You look at Devontae Adams. Didn't the Rams make a big trade for a wide receiver a couple of years ago as well?
Yeah, they got Brandon Cooks and Sammy Watkins, both of
Yep.
those guys. And
And you go through the list of the different trades in this cycle this year, which has been it's by far the craziest offseason I think anybody's ever seen in the NFL. We haven't seen this kind of turnover, people getting moved in trades and the free agent period kind of playing into all of that, the superstar quarterbacks that moved. But it's all because the Rams won the Super Bowl this year. And so there's a lot of teams that are more willing to move those first round picks for someone that's going to help them more than those guys are, at least initially. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I think, like you said, the teams that are willing to give up those, like the Bills, a couple years ago with Stephon Diggs, just that guy that can get them over the hump is the kind of what they need. And I think the Broncos did that. The Browns did that with Deshaun Watson, although he might not play. It's uncertain right now. The Dolphins getting Tua some help, but I think that they're making these big, like, splashy trades because they look at the Rams and go, "Oh, that's worked for them the past couple of years." I know even in 2018 where they were doing that thing with Brandon Cooks, and I'm trying to think of the other guys. I know Aqib Talib, I believe, was a free agent. Like
I think
some
so.
of those.
Jalen Ramsey was a trade.
Yeah, Ramsey. I was just talking about more of the Super Bowl, like when they're after the Super Bowl, everyone was like, "Oh, there's no way they can keep doing this," and they just kept on doing it. They're like, eventually it's going to catch up to them. So far, it really hasn't. I mean, they've let a couple key players walk in free agency. Ndamukong Suh left, and LaMarcus Joyner, Corey Littleton. That's a big one that they still kind of had the need for this year, was a good middle linebacker. They got Bobby Wagner now, so it's all good. But just the turnover that the Rams roster had is amazing. I think there's maybe like, I saw something, there was like 3 or so players that were on the roster in 2018 that played in the Super Bowl. It was Woods, Whitworth, Donald, and maybe Cup, but he didn't play. And those are just like maybe 5-ish guys that were on the roster, and that's just crazy out of 53 within like 3 years.
And it's they do such a good job, like we touched on a little bit earlier, with the late round hits and developing those late round hits into people, that become consistent and relative starters. And Van Jefferson might be the next guy. I don't know if Tutu Atwell will ever be that guy. That was a weird pick in the second round last year. But and then they still have the room to go out and get these guys like Allen Robinson, like Bobby Wagner, make these trades for the Matthew Staffords and the Jalen Ramseys, and you go down the list of all the different guys that they've moved and traded for and stuff. But it's almost like if the Saints can find a way to get out of a $70 million cap hole, the Rams are going to find a way to keep doing this year after year after year.
Yeah, I know. I've heard a lot of the cap is a myth. The cap doesn't exist. Like, they can just keep kicking the can down the road. I think that's partially true. But then you see, Devontae Adams, you see Tyreek Hill, those guys that they didn't want to give mega deals to just because of their cap space, and that kind of puts it back into perspective.
And that's probably why the Rams have let the people that they have walk, is cap, and trying to find a more affordable way to keep people around on the team, which it is a challenge. It does become a challenge. There are cap wizards that manage to find a way on every team, but you still have these crazy cap hits that you'll see. Like Matt Ryan right now for the Falcons is a $40 million cap hit. And he's traded, he's not going to be playing for them. He's going to be playing for the Indianapolis Colts this year, and he's $40 million on the Falcons salary cap. So
yeah,
it's definitely not a myth.
Some of those creative contracts have definitely had to come into play too. I know Wagner's deal was a 5-year deal originally reported, but then I think they went back on that and said technically it's a 5-year deal with incentives, but pretty much it's only a 2-year deal. Yeah. And just looking at some of the numbers, his cap hit's only $2.5 million the first year, and then he just increases from there. And as he hits those incentives, then the money just keeps going up.
Yeah, which is honestly, from a team standpoint, that's a really smart way of doing it, because you're putting the stress not on your salary, not on your cap, but on the player, and needing the player to perform. And so when they start to drop, and Wagner starting to get to that age where you're going to start to see, that talent kind of drop as it does when you start to get into that age, you know, over the next couple of years, you just don't know when that's going to happen. It's going to, and you want to be prepared for it, where he's not going to be so productive. Um, it's smart, and it's kind of the other thing too that that was kind of big about the Deshaun Watson deal to Cleveland, which is it's a whole nother topic within itself because of the way that that deal is structured. But you kind of see that same sort of with the guaranteed money and how he got all of it guaranteed, and it's going to change a lot, for players in the NFL with not having that flexibility to create these awesome little contracts that are incentive based and everything. It's Watson's contract's going to change a lot of that.
Yeah, I think Wagner's deal as well was also impacted by the fact that he's from here. Like I listened to him on the Pat McAfee show, I think it was a couple days ago, and he was just telling Pat how like he had an offer between the Ravens and the Rams, and he took a little bit of a pay cut. He said just to stay here because his family's here. It's he's made enough money as an All
Yep.
Pro Super Bowl champion linebacker that he just took a pay cut so his family could come to the games, and that also impacts it too. I know that Darius Williams went down to Jacksonville because that's where he's from as well, just to take a little bit of a pay cut so your family can come see you play.
Now, Jacksonville, a lot of people are very critical about what they've done this offseason with, Trent Blockay, or I slaughter his name every time. Because I see the way that that's spelled, and I immediately think Key and Peele for some reason, with the Balake, but it's Balky. So Trent Balky is an excellent talent evaluator. In fact, when you talk with people around the league, they'll all tell you the same thing. Yeah, he's a dick. So, and he's really tough to work for, but he knows football so well, and he's so good at evaluating talent. And, when you look at the 49ers and the success that they built that roster into, he's a lot of that reason why they were able to build that. He's really good at his job, is my point. And when you look at the Christian Kirk deal, for example, this year, which a lot of people immediately freaked out over because it was like the first numbers that came out, I think, were 21 million a year or something. The way that it's structured is there's a lot of incentives in there too. And so it's really only like a $16 million a year deal. But you also saw just the fact that he could put the team, like he could put that receiver there in that position and kind of came out looking almost like a genius after we got through all these new wide receiver contracts. Now Christian Kirk last year, with Arizona, I think you probably saw this when they lost DeAndre Hopkins. Kirk didn't drop his production. In fact, he upped it. He stepped up his game. And he was that guy that they went to. And they had AJ Green playing on the other side. So a lot of people want to sit there and criticize that deal and everything, but I'm telling you, it's going to look really smart here in a couple of years, I think.
Yeah, I know that probably was maybe the reason that Devontae and Tyreek got a little bit mad too, because they were like, "Hey, that guy's getting just as much, if not more, money than I am. Why am I not getting that kind of money?" I know when I saw that Tyreek Hill notification, I was like, "Wow!" Like I knew Devontae was on the last year of his deal and everything, like he was franchise tagged, and but I saw Tyreek Hill wanting to be traded, and I was like very surprised because you think of that Chiefs trio, Mahomes, Kelsey, Hill. Like that seemed to be like an inseparable part of their offense.
Mm-hmm. And they let him go. They let him walk, or they traded him, which is insane when you think about the speed element and just how much chemistry he had with Patrick Mahomes over the last couple of years. And he's gone.
Yeah.
For what was it, a second round pick? Was it
It was a first and a second. I know it was at least a couple. I thought it was a couple of firsts. But I know that they wanted to just get Tua some help. And that's, yeah, a first, a second, a fourth, a fourth next year, and then a sixth next year. So
I mean,
that's just another blockbuster trade, and you want to go get your young quarterback some help. That's how you do it. I wrote about Tua back in the off season, just about how he doesn't really deserve that much hate as a rookie quarterback. People
mhm.
were thinking he could step in and just like immediately change the franchise, but you got to wait a couple of years with these guys. Look at Josh Allen. You look at some of those other guys that they take at least a year to develop and learn, especially coming off an injury as big as his was. And I
Yeah,
think that if he doesn't prove he's the guy this year, he's definitely done. But he has all the tools he needs to succeed in terms of like weapons as a quarterback.
the
Miami's
speed
offensive
across
line,
the speed across the board at their skill positions right now is insane.
yeah, Miami's offensive line is why I know hasn't been too great. But when you have just those weapons, you can just scheme them open on some screens or like some quick passes. If your offensive line isn't doing that well, which theirs was pretty low tier last year.
And I think you'll see a step up in it, because now that a lot of those guys were really young, they've got that experience. They're going to step up. And they're going to be. They won't be a top unit, but they'll be in the top side of average. Beyond past 16, I think.
Yeah, I think another reason that people were so harsh on Tua was you saw Justin Herbert and Joe Burrow being picked,
Yeah,
before and after him, and those guys were franchise game changers from the moment they stepped in. He just kind of wasn't, and that's why people were so like ripe to give him some hate about it.
and people forget too. Like Justin Herbert stepped into that situation kind of accidentally because they weren't
Yeah,
going to roll with Tyrod Taylor, and the
so he
team
got
medic
that
took him out.
punctured lung.
Yeah, and the team medic took him out. Like how frustrating is that as a quarterback when you're just like you're getting ready to start a game, the first game of the year, and your own doctor takes you out of the game. Which the Chargers have had a very long history of malpractice in their medical side, which someday I'll have to get one of these guys on that talks about this that are more medically inclined than I am. But I've listened to some real talks and stuff, and it goes back to Junior Seau, as a linebacker and how they dealt with his concussions back then. Like it's just a long history of malpractice in that organization, which is wild. But the other thing I wanted to point out about Tua is when he was coming out of college, I loved Tua. And I thought I had him over Justin Herbert, actually. And it's because when I watched him throw, his release, the way the ball comes off his hand and everything reminds me of Drew Brees. He doesn't have the ungodly arm strength that Drew Brees has. It's definitely a suitable arm, and it's above average, but it's not Drew Brees' arms. But he has the same sort of compact release motion, the angle the ball comes out. There was a sports center or sports science back when ESPN used to do this way back in the day. This is like going back to he was just joining just joining the Saints, and they broke down his release and the motion and how that created a more compact release and accuracy. And it was a very, very interesting little piece, and it carried over in time. As we saw that he's the most accurate quarterback we've ever seen grace the field. He did it for just about 20 years. So Tua has that same sort of just natural feel, and he has the same sort of release motion and everything. And I think he's a little bit more mobile than Drew was too. Granted, we're still kind of figuring that out with, as he's battled through injuries the last couple of years, but there's a lot of really interesting tools there. And if he gets it all put together this year and puts out that good year, watch out. Miami is going to be so good.
Yeah, I think that that's something that definitely can be coached if you have all the physical tools. Like I know I was a big Deontay Johnson guy a couple of years ago for fantasy football, and people were just hating
Excuse
on
me.
him because of the drops. But I
Shoot.
know that drops is something that can be coached, and he had all the physical tools. Same with Herbert, like he had all the intangibles and the physical tools. He just needed the right coaching, right situation. Then you look at those guys, and now they're pretty much stars.
Yeah, to an extent. Excuse me. Sorry. I think drops is a lot like accuracy with a quarterback. You don't see a lot of guys develop better hands because a lot of it is it's a natural concentration type thing, right? Um, so one of the guys that I'm really worried about this year be Christian Watson out of North Dakota State, right? And he tested out ridiculously well. He's a ridiculously good wide receiver in terms of athleticism, his speed, his straight line speed stood out. Like that was the number one thing. They had him returning kicks because he was so fast and he could outrun the entire, coverage teams. And he did so. One of the biggest games that North Dakota State played against Sam Houston in the playoffs in the spring. That's he has the skills, right? Like you're talking about, but he also has like one of the worst drop rates in all of college football, especially in this class coming out. And that's kind of the concern with him. Is right around about the beginning of the year, I talked with a few people about like that are working the NFL about the receiver position, and what is the NFL kind of looking for at this point. One of the people I spoke with about it or texted with was Jim Nagy. He was the Senior Bowl director, and he kind of gave me a little description about being versatile and having the tools and this and that, da da da, and really being able to run after the catch. And I was like, well, that sounds like Christian Watson, right? Like that's a first round receiver, right? And he was kind of like, well, he's got some drop issues. He's got to get better with his hands. And I think he dropped 12.1% of his targets last year, which is an insane number. That's bad. So it's always one of two things. It's either A, your hands are probably too small. And we hear that with quarterbacks, right? With the way that they there was this whole big thing with Kenny Pickett this year, which, sometimes that is a deal. Watson, I got to pull him up. I don't think with him, it was hands. That was the deal.
Yeah, I know. I've been hearing from lots of people in like mock drafts and everything that he's projected to go like second-ish, third round.
He could slide into the first right now. There are teams actually talking about that. He could slide into the first. I'm just trying to pull up his measurables. Here we go. Yeah, with him, it wasn't hands. He's 10 and 1/8. I thought he had big hands. So with him, it's concentration. That's the other problem that you have. Being able to concentrate on the football through the catch, at the catch point, not deal with a lot of the traffic or anything else like that. And I think that's his issue that he's going to have to figure out and overcome at the next level. And that's what concerns me about him.
Yeah, I think that more and more rookie wide receivers are going to have to be put in these situations, like you said, where it's like they have to be coached almost like as they're going to be starters, because you never know with especially like recently, like Justin Jefferson, all those LSU guys, like they were so good in college and that people just expected them to fit right in the NFL. And most of them have. I think the only one that comes to mind that hasn't is Clyde Edwards-Helaire. That hasn't really been that impressive. But it's
as a running back, yeah.
Yeah, but it's a passing league now, and the more good wide receivers you can have, the better.
There, you start getting into the late third, early fourth round when the Rams start picking, right? Who do you want to see them take?
I've done a couple mock drafts recently. I've seen Dylan Parham is a guy that I liked a lot, but just keeps going higher and higher. And
yeah,
I've seen people that love him out of the second, so that's pretty much out of reach. I've seen a lot of Donovan West out of Arizona State. Cordell Flott was a guy I liked out of LSU, cornerback. And then I would say position wise, I would see them taking cornerback or an offensive line with the first pick. And then just as you go on more and more, I know a lot of people want the punter out of San Diego State to replace Johnny Hecker. I've seen that a lot on Rams Twitter. And I'm not too sure about that one. I know they just signed Riley Dixon, so it's not an immediate replacement, but he should be a decent punter. I mean, you don't have to be amazing to be a punter, but he's a good veteran, and we'll see how that goes from there. But as in terms of the draft, taking a punter early doesn't seem like the move for a team that shouldn't really need to punt that often on offense.
Yeah, but I mean, did you watch Ariza at all this past year?
I did
Like
not, but I've
this
heard good
dude,
things about him.
this dude hit, I want to say, 3 punts over 70 yards last year, if I'm recalling that correctly. Um, he's got a cannon. Like it's ridiculous what that guy can do. See if I can't find this real quick. Make sure I've got this right. Yeah, I'm not going to find it there. PFF it is.
Yeah, so I've been doing just a couple mock drafts, seeing who's available with. I think it's pick one. Yeah, pick 104 is their first pick, which is last in the league in terms of who's picking first, right after the Dolphins at 102. And it's been interesting to see like what kind of guys fall down there. I know that Quentin Lake, I've been able to grab him in the 6th and 7th round. That I feel like should be a decent pick for them, and I feel like he would fit really well with the Rams. Actually, watching him at UCLA too, because he's one of those guys that was you can stick him in the box, and he's just a solid tackler.
All right. I got that stat wrong, by the way. It wasn't 3. It was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 over 70 yards,
Wow,
including an 86-yarder against San Jose State, an 81-yarder against Air Force. He averaged 50 and a half.
that's pretty impressive for a college punter.
Yeah, he's ridiculous. And his hang time was right there at about 3.92 on average. It's decent. He can level it. That guy's ridiculous. And he's not just a punter. You can use him on kickoffs too. I think he handled kickoff duties for San Jose State, if I remember, San Diego State, if I remember correctly.
Yeah,
So
just a versatile special teams guy. I think I wouldn't be surprised if they pick him because their special teams unit was probably the worst part of the team last year.
yeah.
And I know that like everyone's
Field
pretty
goals
upset
too,
about
by
the
the way.
Tutu Atwell pick. So we'll see where
Yeah.
they go from here. But progress is being made.
Yeah. And it'll come a time. It's one of those things where you don't need anything too crazy. You just need to try to, especially at that position. It's nice to have somebody who can flip the field, makes the job easier for your defense. Which, if you've got a guy that can punt 50 yards, any given kick and just absolutely flip it the field, like that's almost a killer. With if you have the right defense in place. Which, looking at their roster, the only position that hits me is kind of like, I don't know about that guy. It's that left cornerback position with Robert Rochelle. Everybody else looks pretty solid on paper.
Yeah, I think I would not be surprised if they choose some more defensive linemen in this draft because they
Yeah.
love rotating those defensive guys around. That's a big part of why Aaron Donald and everyone else is so good on that defensive line because they're able to stay fresh, just rotating around so often. I first wondered that when I was
They could
watching
use
them.
one more. Yeah, you're right. They could use an
Yeah,
interior guy.
when I first started watching the team, I was wondering always, I was like, why isn't Aaron Donald in on every single snap? Because you think that like you want your best player on the field, but he only plays, I think, about 60-70% of the snaps because they rotate, Greg Gaines in and out, and they use just all those different players in different packages. And Ashawn Robinson, another just great player for them.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the guys they picked last year, which is, Ernest Brown and Bobby Brown. Like those guys are both they're going to be good pros too, especially in a rotational role. They could use one more guy, I think. And this is a great class to try to get somebody later on in the draft, and hit on another 4th or 5th round pick like they did with those two guys last year.
Yeah, definitely. I know that Bobby Brown didn't see much action, so I would expect him to step up, especially with Ashawn Robinson being on his last year of the contract. So I would expect to see him play more often. And just looking at the depth chart, you're right. There's no one really behind Greg Gaines and Bobby Brown at nose tackle. And I know Jonah Williams hasn't really played much. He's just a special teams guy. Same with Marquise Copeland. And either that or an outside linebacker to kind of replace Von Miller, replace because you don't really replace Von Miller, but just another one of those rotational pass rush guys.
And I mean, it's not terrible right now where they are at outside linebacker because Terrell Lewis is there if he can stay healthy. If he can't, you still have Justin Hollins, Leonard Floyd, and honestly, Chris Garrett. I know he hasn't played much, but he could potentially be a good guy too. He was really good at Mizzou when he played, 7th-round pick out of 21.
Yeah, I heard good things about Chris Garrett all year and even through training camp. But when it came time, I don't think I've seen him play. I think it was because he was on the reserve list
Yeah,
for most of the year.
yeah.
And
Which he could be a good. And that's kind of that fits him, an outside linebacker kind of role. He kind of played that weak side, I think, at Mizzou. Because I think they run a 4-3, and this is a 3-4, so they kind of moved him to a more outside role. But he also always flashed as a special, like a pass rusher. That's kind of his thing.
yeah, right now on the depth chart, he's listed as the strong side linebacker after Justin Hollins, who was also a pretty solid player that they got from free agency.
Fawns.
That's another thing that they've just had to do over the years was, get those guys that might not be absolutely game changing in free agency, but just get those like kind of diamonds in the rough that you might not think of that really fit their scheme and their culture that they're trying to build.
Yeah, and they've done that really well. They've got a lot of guys on that they brought in that they don't make headlines, when they bring them, but they turn into suitable players.
Yeah,
Ashawn Robinson didn't turn a lot of headlines when they picked him up.
yeah, that was one of the only like free agents they were able to pick up a couple years ago because they were just so strapped for cap at the time. And even if you look at this past year when they had Brandon Powell, who was pretty much like a practice squad guy, his entire career, he was like one of the only persons to return a kickoff for a touchdown.
Yep. Now, I remember Brandon Powell at South Carolina, and this guy could play. Like, he was awesome. He was a special teams kind of guy. His issue was hands. Wide receiver, running back, kind of hybrid before Deebo Samuel. That's what he did at South Carolina. He was awesome.
Yeah, I think Brandon Powell was definitely what they thought Tutu Atwell was going to be for them. But
Yeah.
after his injuries and just kind of not panning out, I think he's probably going to see an increased role this next year. I'm not sure what his role is going to be now that they've signed, Allen Robinson and Van Jefferson's still there. I think I said that in one of my articles. Like, there's not really a defined role for him yet, especially considering Brandon Powell's their kick return guy, and he's been doing a great job. And then especially if they sign Odell Beckham Jr. back, there's not really a role for him anywhere on the offense either.
So, funny little story is, I guess it's not particularly funny, but I asked Jacob Harris if he wanted to come on this podcast, because Jacob was at the College Gridiron Showcase last year. I was working for the Brawl Network and covered him. So I'd asked him if he wanted to be on the podcast, and he said, I appreciate the offer. He's like, but I need to focus on this year. Like, he is all in. Like, he's not doing anything. He's not doing any media. He's not doing anything crazy. He is focused on football to make this roster as a tight end. And you kind of look at this, the roster right now. And they brought in Ben Skronik, last year at Notre Dame, who's a lot like Jacob Harris to a certain extent, a big receiver who probably is better suited as a tight end, which is where Harris was. They've got Bryson Hopkins and Tyler Higbee and Kendall Blanton, so there's some guys that he's going to have to outwork and really step up, and he is already laser focused on doing that this year.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I think that plays to the idea of like next man up and how they, even if you're a 4th round pick, you're going to have to outwork the guys that are on top of you in the depth chart. And I think that he could definitely be tied in too, as play that Gerald Everett kind of role as the Rams would like to run in the past.
Yep.
And I wouldn't be surprised if Tyler Higbee is even on the trade block. I mean, they're paying him a good amount of money, and if they just are able to trade him for a decent amount of picks, I wouldn't be surprised if that happens, honestly.
Yeah, I can see that too. I can see that. Overall, it's a good loaded roster. There's a lot of really good talent here.
Yeah, I think as for the draft, they're just gonna try and get depth everywhere. I would say mostly at the offensive line and interior position because they lost Corbett, and they're trying to. I don't think Bobby Evans is the guy at right guard, so maybe someone there. And I would say also inside linebacker because Ernest Jones is pretty much their only like option aside from Bobby Wagner. And I know that Tor Reader, his tender was declined, so he's out of there. And they have, like you said, Travin Howard. But those guys aren't game changers necessarily. I think they were going to try and develop another inside linebacker this year.
I can see that too. But who's going to be there at inside linebacker is kind of the question. Might be looking at I'm going to pull up my list on that. Like a Terrell Bernard, Jacoby McLean.
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think anyone that they can get on there and just have them learn from like almost the best linebacker of the last decade would be great. And I think that was another reason that they wanted to sign him because Bobby Wagner is just a great veteran presence.
I would say so. Consensus. This is a NFL mock draft database. I'm pulling this off of Consensus Big Board. Has Terrell Bernard down at like 127. I think he's going to be gone well before then. Versatile guy that can play. He can play, zone coverage over the middle. I think I'm expecting him to go somewhere in the late second, early third. So maybe someone more like Jesse Luketa out of Penn State. Jacoby McLean definitely could be there. McLean wasn't terrible at Auburn. He had his limitations athletically overall, but instinctive. So there's some guys here. Maybe even Micah McFadden out of Indiana sliding up in there too.
Yeah. And I think that another surprise pick that I think the man make would be running back. Because you look at the roster and Darrell Henderson is in the last year of his deal, I believe. Maybe he's got one more, but he's getting there in terms of contract. I know they picked Jake Funk last year, but he's pretty much been a special teams guy for them. Cam Akers is still dealing with that Achilles. I don't think he was 100% playing last year. You could kind of tell. But almost all the running backs got hurt at one point or another last year. And none of them are really like that solid in terms of injuries. So wouldn't be surprised that they pick another running back as well.
I would love to see them get somebody with more power, personally.
Yeah, Sony Michel did a great job in terms of like a power back for them last year. And when he was leading the backfield in like week 11, 12, 13 against Jacksonville and against Arizona, like he was doing a really great job of just that like zone run scheme that they were running.
Someone who would make a lot of sense, I think, would be Abram Smith. Baylor running back, played linebacker. I'd love to see him with the Rams.
Yeah, just the different style of back that they're going for. I know Darrell Henderson is kind of like a power back, but I know he's a little bit more of a satellite back in terms of like he's shifty.
Yeah.
But I know Cam Akers is definitely their like fast, quick guy, and Jake Funk has not really done much on the offense yet. But
Funk is a downhill runner. So I watched him a lot at Maryland last year. And he did the College Gridiron Showcase too. So I covered him as well.
Yeah, he's been pretty much a special teams guy for them. I know he played a couple snaps here and there because they were so thin at running backs. I know Xavier Jones got hurt in training camp.
Yeah.
You had Cam Akers down with the Achilles.
Yeah.
And then Darrell Henderson's just been banged up his whole career. I never thought he was going to handle the full workhorse duties because he's just not that type of player. And that's fine. I mean, he does a great job in like the limited action that he gets.
Someone who, like, dark horse on that roster right now is Javian Hawkins. I'm telling you, Louisville running back. That guy could fly,
Yeah, I
and he
don't think
broke a
he's got
lot of
enough of a
runs.
shot to like warrant getting a spot on the offense. Yeah, because I know they just used them on special teams last year.
Yeah, well, if Xavier Jones gets hurt again, or somebody else gets hurt again, and you have that spot open up, Javian Hawkins is somebody to watch out for. That kid can fly. He's the receiver too.
Bookmark it right now.
On the calendar, on as of September 1st, Javian Hawkins. Go mess with John if he's not on the roster.
Yeah, I'm definitely gonna try to make it down to training camp again this year. That was really fun just to go see those guys put in some work and take some notes. I know my prediction wasn't entirely right. I think I went 43 out of 53 for the roster. What really
Yep.
surprised me was getting Bryce Perkins making it, and that was certainly a surprise. But they liked him in the building, I know, and just having a third quarterback to practice with, I think, was very valuable for them.
I've been to the Titans training camp a couple times, and that's always been a good time. It's always been fun. So
Yeah, I know they were having competition. This is what happens when you have a team that's pretty solid all around. Is the competition was at long snapper, and I know that Matthew Orsak was the one that eventually won it because he was the one that was taking the first team reps
yeah,
all the time.
yeah, yeah. It's wild, man. Getting to cover a team that goes to the Super Bowl, experiencing all of that, being your favorite team. It's a great experience. And I
Yeah,
think the biggest challenge that I had was trying to level my expectations the next year, you know, because the next year, it was like, oh, well, Carson Wentz is coming back and he was an MVP, should have been MVP even after the injury, but Tom Brady got it. Um, you go, you got all these guys coming back. Oh, we hit this hole, we filled that hole. It's very difficult to win a Super Bowl. And that's kind of, I think, the first thing that you learn after experiencing that is just how difficult it is when you start watching the next year. Because the
oh yeah,
target's on your back now.
yeah, definitely. I think that people definitely underrate how difficult it was for Tom Brady to do that and to do it on a different team, even and across all the different years. And people have gotten their expectations inflated because they saw the Patriots do that for so many years and be that great.
Yeah, it's very difficult. And that's the thing that people forget is there's 32 teams playing in this league, and only two of them are going to go to the Super Bowl, and one of them is going to win it. So it's a very, very difficult league with all the turning pieces and people moving to different teams, whether they be players or coaches or front office or whatever it is. It's a
Yeah, that was
crazy, crazy thing, and it's beautiful.
yeah, that was something that I think Aaron Rodgers was actually right about. I know
Yeah.
that might be a controversial thing to say, but I listened to him on Aaron Rodgers Tuesday almost every week on the Pat McAfee show, and he was just saying how like the turnover that a teams have is like people don't realize it, that even if like most of the players stay, like the coaches move around, like it's a different team every year no matter what. There's never
Yeah.
been really a roster and a coaching staff that stays every year.
Yeah, it's insane. And when I was at the combine this year, I saw that firsthand, with different coaches getting used to each other, scouts getting used to each other, taking opportunities to go out and try to, hang out, get to know each other better because they're going to be working for the next year with each other. And it's a different world, and you just don't realize it until you start to see it. But that's the
Yeah,
biggest thing when you
definitely.
cover a team.
But I think when you look at the NFC next year compared to the AFC, it's not a long shot to say that they're pretty much locks to make the playoffs.
Oh no, I would be shocked if this team doesn't make the playoffs right now.
Yeah,
I
there's
would be
definitely some
surprised.
things they need to iron out. I know that there was a lot of inconsistency last year, especially in like the November
Yeah,
stretch when they didn't win a game.
but that is a good point that you bring up, is the fact that the AFC is so much more loaded than the NFC right now. You know, when you're looking at the AFC, it's like every division has 2 or 3 teams that are in the running to win that division. You know, the East, the AFC West, it's anybody's game outside of maybe the Raiders. The Raiders might be the lone team there. In the South, it's the Titans or the Colts. In the North, it could be the Browns, it could be the Bengals, could be the Steelers, could be the Ravens. That's really a free for all. It's whoever can put it all together. And what's Deshaun Watson going to look like after sitting for a year? How much is he going to play? And then in the East, you've got the Patriots and you've got the Bills. The Bills are loaded, and then you got the Dolphins. So, like, it's crazy right now. If you're a team like the Jets or the Texans or the Jaguars and you're just sitting there, you're just like, wow, like, I don't know what we're going to do this year. Like, I'd be worried about my job working there.
Yeah, I think that the Bills were a pretty similar team to the Rams last year in the sense that they had all the pieces that they needed. They could just not really put it together at sometimes. Like I know they lost to the Jags. That was a really disappointing one for them. But they have all the pieces they need to make a run at the Super Bowl. They were just really inconsistent. And that was the same for the Rams. I mean, I've watched them play all year this year, and you can see it sometimes. That's why like Stafford led the league in interceptions. Like he wasn't 100%, clicking all the time. And I think that was expected, of a guy that comes in, he's in a system in Detroit for 13 years and comes into a whole new building, whole new locker room. And that was the same thing with Brady last year, was they were just kind of up and down. I believe they won the same amount of games too.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it came down to that last couple plays against the Rams, in the divisional, that made the difference. And almost blowing a 24. That was a fun game. Almost blowing a 24-point lead.
I don't know.
That was
about
a fun
the
game to watch. That was very fun. It was like, because it was funny you're sitting there at the beginning of the third quarter, they're down by 24. You're like, yeah, I've seen Tom Brady do this. He's been down 25. He was in the Super Bowl. And then they start coming back, and you're like, oh my God, it's actually happening.
Yeah, once they started the fumbling and like the interceptions and everything, like that's when that team started to fall apart, no matter what the game. Once the turnovers began, then it was like, oh no.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a fun game. I really enjoyed that one.
When you look at the NFC, I mean, the NFC East's pretty much just either the Cowboys or the Eagles. Washington needs to figure out their quarterback situation first, and the Giants are going to be pretty mediocre, I would say, for the next couple of years until they just get some more young talent around them. The North, I would say probably the Vikings would be the ones to win it next year, because I don't think the Packers are going to be as good without Devontae.
Brian Dable is somebody to keep your eye on. And a lot of people don't give him as much credit, but he was the offensive coordinator for Alabama the year that they won the national championship with Tua. That was back, trying to remember. That was when Jalen Hurts got benched in the national championship game.
Of 2017, 2018?
Yeah. And he was Alabama's offensive coordinator that year. And, I mean, they were dominant. Like, they just, all year, they played so well. I think they lost one game to Ole Miss, and it was a kind of a weird game. But crazy dominant team that year. And he took the offensive coordinator job at Buffalo right after that, went up there. You could really credit the development of Josh Allen to him. So I was shocked that he didn't get a head coaching job sooner. I thought it was insane that he was up there in Buffalo for 3 years. But that guy is going to be a great head coach. Like, I'm just telling you right now, like, that guy is on top of his game, and he's really good at what he does. So the Giants might not be mediocre as long as people think, because he's good at putting people in positions to succeed. And he's shown that at both levels, the NFL and college.
I just don't think they have the level of talent on that team so far, though. I mean, Saquon Barkley, he's kind of been decent recently after his injuries, but between Daniel Jones and like all those people on that offense, I'm thinking maybe they're like a 8-9 team at the max.
Yeah, this year. I don't think that they're going to win the division this year, but next year, watch out.
And then
I'm telling you, you heard it here first. I'm just telling you. Brian
when it
Dabble
comes
is,
to the Vikings, I think they're a team that people are kind of underestimating because they were pretty good a couple of years ago when they've made the playoffs. I think every other year. Something I saw.
yep,
And I think under Kevin O'Connell running the Sean McVay offense, that was when Kirk Cousins had some of his best years in Washington when he was running that kind of offense, where it takes the pressure off of you as a quarterback
yeah.
and you're just making some of those complex reads. And just the offense that they have with Cook and Thielen and Jefferson, I think they can be the ones to dethrone the Packers for top spot in the division.
The deal with Kirk is it's really hard to get him to make good plays out of structure. If you look consistently throughout his career, when he has time to sit there in the pocket and make throws, he does it really, really well. He's really good at that. It's when the play starts to break down, he has to move and he has to either extend the play or improvise. That's where he struggles. And
Sounds
that's my
like someone
concern with
that's
him.
pretty familiar to me, who
Yeah,
now
Jared Goff,
quarterbacks for
right?
the Detroit Lions.
Yeah, Jared Goff. Yeah, same sort of issue. Um, but that's what's held him back his entire career. From being able to take that next step is that when he gets out of structure, it's so bad. And you just don't know what you're going to have. So when you can get pressure, when you can move him off, out of the pocket and off of his comfort position, he has been consistently terrible his entire career. And I think that's the deal with him.
Yeah,
So,
I think that Jared was definitely the same way. I know, like I said already, the Miami game when they were just consistently pressuring him, and they had like
yep.
just amazing fronts from Brian Flores' defense, and that one was a terrible game to watch. I know the Super Bowl was a terrible game to watch. Like he
I
would just
actually
get,
enjoyed that Super Bowl immensely.
yeah, he would just get like the slightest bit of hands in his face and just collapse. Like one of my favorite games from him, like I was a pretty big fan of his. I have that was my first Rams jersey, was a Jared Goff jersey, because just his ability to like hit guys downfield. Like my favorite game from him was the Minnesota Vikings game on Thursday Night Football, where he posted the perfect
Yep.
passer rating.
Yep.
That was
I
just
remember
some of
that.
the best football I've seen in a while from him.
I remember that. No, this was really unpopular to say back then. I enjoyed that Super Bowl immensely because it was a defensive battle and it was a chess match the entire time. And the defensive coordinators just going back and forth with each other, and I loved that. I thought that was awesome. Um, and I think it was also because it was the last game I was going to be watching before I left for basic training. So I went to basic training like the next week after that game, and yeah, it was fun. It was an awesome game. I enjoyed that one immensely. Now I'm also not a Rams fan nor am I a Patriots fan, so I was able to watch it from a I'm not involved in this. I'm just enjoying football, and a lot of people are like, "Oh, this is boring. This is terrible. This is a terrible game for the NFL." I was like, "No, this is awesome. This is like real football right here."
Yeah, definitely. It was not as fun to watch as from my perspective, but it was, looking back on some of the film and stuff, it was really interesting to see how Belichick learned from what they were doing earlier in the year to
Yep.
pressure Goff and just like take away Todd Gurley entirely.
Hey, Gurley's
That's,
never been the same player.
oh no, definitely. That's something that's always been a big what if in the back of, I'm sure, of everyone's mind in terms of the Rams, was what if Todd Gurley like continued to play, because he was a monster. Like they were just, that was why Jared Goff was so good originally, was because he just kind of leaned on that run game for the most part. And then when that went down in 2019, you could saw his numbers drop.
Yeah, that definitely had something to do with it. But hey, I appreciate the time, Nico. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Really
Go
enjoyed
ahead
it.
and plug your stuff where people can find you for everyone who's listening.
Yeah, so football by Nico on Twitter and Instagram. Don't really use the Instagram much, but it's there if anyone wants to follow me. And then obviously I'm writing for NFL Sapient and Fantasy's Finest. So check out articles there. I got an article coming up soon on the Sean McVay offense. So that'll be fun.
Hell yeah. You take it easy tonight, Dinko.
All right. It was a pleasure.
Thank you for tuning into my channel, checking out the content. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and follow us on your favorite podcast platform as well.